Welcome back to another journey through the darkened corridors of Five Nights at Freddy's lore, where we'll explore two moments that forever changed the landscape of animatronic entertainment. Tonight, we descend into the careful examination of the bite of 1983 and the bite of 1987, two incidents separated by years yet bound together by their devastating impact on innocent lives and the establishments that housed these mechanical performers. These are stories of family gatherings turned tragic, of technology meeting fragility, of pranks escalating beyond control, and of the thin line between wonder and horror that defines this universe. From the humble beginnings of Fredbear's Family Diner through the ambitious relaunch of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1987, we'll trace every shadow, every decision, every mechanical movement that led to these pivotal moments. Whether you're encountering this narrative for the first time, revisiting these familiar events as they guide you toward rest, or simply allowing the story to wash over you like a gentle tide of darkness, let it carry you through the complete chronology of these tragedies. Before we begin our descent, feel free to like and subscribe if this style of deep, immersive storytelling resonates with you, unfolding detail by detail like memories surfacing from forgotten depths. Share in the comments where you're listening from, what hour marks your clock, and perhaps which element of this twisted tale lingers most persistently in your thoughts. There's a quiet comfort in knowing these stories connect us across distance and time. Now, let us begin. In the early days of what would become a sprawling franchise marked by tragedy and mystery, there existed a modest establishment known as Fredbear's Family Diner. This venue, nestled in a quiet corner of Hurricane, Utah, represented the humble genesis of animatronic entertainment as a family experience. The diner opened its doors in the early 1980s, a time when technological innovation began intersecting with the restaurant industry in fascinating new ways. The exterior presented an unassuming facade, brick and mortar painted in cheerful yellows and browns, with a sign that promised something special inside. Families from the surrounding neighborhoods would arrive in station wagons and sedans, parking in the small lot where children would press their faces against windows, eager to glimpse the attractions within. Inside, the atmosphere embraced a specific warmth that defined the era. Red checkered tablecloths covered round tables scattered throughout the dining area, each accompanied by chairs just small enough for children to feel the space was designed with them in mind. The scent of fresh pizza dough mingled with the faint mechanical odor of servos and hydraulics, creating an olfactory signature that would become synonymous with these establishments. Overhead lights cast a golden glow across the room, their warmth reflecting off the polished surfaces of arcade cabinets positioned along the walls. The carpet, patterned with stars and confetti designs, muffled footsteps and created a sense of enclosed comfort. This was a space designed to feel both exciting and safe, a combination that would prove tragically ironic. The diner's layout centered around a small performance stage, elevated just enough to grant the animatronic characters prominence without creating distance. Purple curtains framed the platform, their fabric worn from repeated opening and closing for shows that occurred on the hour. Behind the stage, a door marked "Employees Only" led to the back rooms where the true complexity of the operation revealed itself. These spaces housed the springlock suits in their dormant states, spare parts organized on metal shelves, and the tools required for maintenance. The proximity of these behind-the-scenes areas to the public space created an unusual transparency, where the magic of the performances existed alongside the mechanical reality of their creation. At the heart of Fredbear's appeal stood two animatronic performers who would become legendary in the annals of this dark history. Fredbear himself commanded the stage as the establishment's namesake, a golden bear whose design attempted to bridge the uncanny valley between cartoon character and mechanical marvel. His exterior consisted of artificial fur in a distinctive yellow-gold shade, carefully selected to catch and reflect the stage lights during performances. The material had a slight sheen, giving Fredbear an almost ethereal quality when illuminated. His face featured large, friendly eyes constructed from glossy black plastic, with white highlights that created the illusion of life. The snout protruded forward with a gentle curve, and the jaw mechanism allowed for a wide range of motion during songs and dialogue, revealing rows of flat, squared teeth that seemed innocuous in their geometric simplicity. Fredbear wore a black bow tie and top hat, accessories that added a touch of showmanship to his design and helped establish his role as the primary entertainer. His body proportions leaned toward the rotund, creating an approachable teddy bear aesthetic that appealed to young children. The paws featured 4 digits each, with joints that allowed for surprisingly expressive gestures during performances. When Fredbear moved, it was with a deliberate, almost paternal quality, his programming designed to evoke comfort and joy. The endoskeleton beneath the exterior consisted of metal framework and hydraulic pistons that powered each movement, creating a soft, whirring sound that became part of the character's presence. Beside Fredbear stood Spring Bonnie, the golden rabbit who served as the establishment's secondary attraction. Where Fredbear embodied gentle authority, Spring Bonnie projected energetic companionship. The rabbit's design featured longer, more angular proportions, with tall ears that stood upright and swiveled slightly during performances to simulate attention and interest. The golden fur matched Fredbear's distinctive shade, creating visual cohesion between the two characters, while their body language and mannerisms established their individual personalities. Spring. Bonnie's face displayed a permanent smile, wider than Fredbear's, with eyes that seemed to convey mischievous delight. The rabbit's most notable feature was the guitar permanently attached to its mechanical hands, an instrument that played a crucial role in the musical performances that defined the diner's entertainment. The guitar itself was painted purple with yellow accents, colors that would become significant in the broader narrative of the franchise. During shows, Spring Bonnie's fingers moved across the strings in programmed patterns that synchronized with pre-recorded music, creating the convincing illusion of live performance. The rabbit's movements possessed a bouncing quality, servos programmed to simulate the energetic movements of a performer lost in the joy of music. What made both Fredbear and Spring Bonnie truly unique within the landscape of animatronic entertainment was their dual functionality, a feature that would ultimately contribute to the darkness that enveloped this establishment. These were not merely automated performers bolted to the stage. They were springlock suits, a term that would become infamous among those who studied the franchise's tragic history. The engineering behind these suits represented an ambitious attempt to maximize versatility in a small venue with limited resources. The concept was elegant in its ingenuity and horrifying in its potential consequences. The springlock mechanism functioned through a system of tightly wound springs and locks that held the animatronic endoskeleton components in a compressed state against the interior walls of the suit. In their default animatronic mode, these locks released, allowing the metal framework to expand and occupy the interior space of the costume, providing the structure necessary for the servos and hydraulics to animate the character. For automated performances, this configuration worked flawlessly, the endoskeleton driving movements, while the exterior costume provided the appealing facade. However, the suits could be converted for human wear through a careful process involving hand cranks positioned at strategic points inside the costume. An employee would use these cranks to manually engage the spring locks, compressing the endoskeleton components and securing them against the suit's inner walls. This compression created a hollow cavity within the suit, theoretically large enough for a person to occupy. Once inside, the employee could see through mesh panels positioned behind the character's eyes and operate the suit as a traditional costume, allowing for close interaction with guests that the automated mode couldn't provide. The danger inherent in this system stemmed from the incredible tension required to hold the endoskeleton in its compressed state. The springs had to be strong enough to support the weight and movement of the metal framework, which meant they stored significant potential energy when wound. If something caused the spring locks to fail, to disengage unexpectedly, that energy would release instantaneously. The endoskeleton would snap back into its expanded position in a fraction of a second, and anyone occupying the suit would find themselves sharing that space with rapidly moving metal components, hydraulic pistons, and sharp-edged framework pieces. Company training materials addressed these risks with clinical detachment, outlining protocols designed to minimize the possibility of spring lock failure. Employees received instruction emphasizing the importance of dry conditions, as moisture could cause the locks to slip and release. The cranking process required precise technique, each lock engaging with an audible click that signaled proper securing. Workers learned to listen for these clicks, to count them, to verify engagement before trusting the suit with their safety. Training videos demonstrated the correct posture for entering the suit, how to move carefully within the compressed space, and the warning signs that might indicate impending failure. Despite these precautions, the fundamental design carried inherent vulnerability. The suits saw regular use, the constant cycling between modes wearing on components that required absolute reliability. The springs lost tension gradually over time. The locks developed microscopic imperfections from repeated engagement, and the cranking mechanisms accumulated metal fatigue. In a perfect world with perfect maintenance and perfect adherence to protocols, the suits might have remained safe. But perfection proves elusive in the daily operation of a family restaurant, where schedules demand efficiency and the show must go on regardless of minor concerns. The safe rooms where employees donned the spring-lock suits existed away from public view, small spaces equipped with the minimal furnishings necessary for the transformation from person to character. Mirrors mounted on walls allowed workers to verify the suit's positioning, while hooks held the costume heads when not in use. The rooms possessed an industrial quality, their concrete floors and bare bulbs creating an atmosphere far removed from the diner's family-friendly presentation. Here, in these utilitarian spaces, employees underwent their metamorphosis, cranking the spring locks one by one, feeling the suit tighten around them as the endoskeleton compressed, then carefully making their way to the dining area where children waited for a chance to interact with their favorite characters. Within the diner's daily operations, these suited performances occurred during special events and peak hours, supplementing the automated shows that ran on schedule throughout the day. A birthday party might feature Spring Bonnie hopping between tables, the employee inside carefully controlling their movements to avoid sudden jarring that might disturb the compressed endoskeleton. The children saw only magic, a character brought to life before their eyes, moving among them with seemingly independent will. They couldn't perceive the human inside, the careful breathing, the acute awareness of every motion, the mental checklist running constantly to maintain safety in an inherently dangerous situation. The diner thrived in its early months, word spreading through the community about this innovative entertainment experience. Parents appreciated the novelty of the animatronic shows combined with quality pizza at reasonable prices. Children formed attachments to Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, recognizing them in the same way they recognized cartoon characters from television. The establishment filled a niche in the local entertainment landscape, becoming a destination for birthday parties, family dinners, and casual weekend outings. Revenue met projections, then exceeded them, encouraging the owners to consider expansion and additional locations. Yet beneath this success, small incidents accumulated in maintenance logs and employee reports. A spring lock slipped during a suit change, releasing with enough force to bruise but not seriously injure the worker inside. Moisture from a spilled drink compromised suit integrity during one performance, requiring emergency evacuation of the costume mid-event. These near misses received attention from management, prompted safety reminders and additional training, but didn't trigger fundamental reconsideration of the spring lock concept itself. The suits had become integral to the diner's identity, their dual functionality a source of pride for the company, a demonstration of innovation that set them apart from competitors. As the establishment's reputation grew, it attracted the attention of families from beyond the immediate neighborhood, including one family whose connection to Fredbears would end in tragedy that resonated through the decades. Among the regular visitors was a young boy who became known in the community and later in the lore as the Crying Child, though his true name remained absent from official records. This boy lived close enough to the diner that its presence loomed large in his daily life, the building visible from certain windows of his home, the sounds of children's laughter and mechanical music drifting across the distance on quiet evenings. The Crying Child stood apart from his peers in his relationship with Fredbear's family diner, where other children experienced joy and excitement at the prospect of visiting the establishment. He felt only dread. This fear manifested in physical symptoms that concerned his family, tears flowing readily when the subject of the diner arose, his small body tensing at the sight of the building or the sound of animatronic music. The phobia extended to the characters themselves, with Fredbear in particular triggering intense anxiety that the boy struggled to articulate in words. The origins of this fear remained ambiguous, perhaps stemming from an early visit where the size of the animatronics overwhelmed his young perception, or possibly connected to deeper anxieties that found expression through these mechanical figures. Regardless of its source, the fear grew over time rather than diminishing through exposure, each encounter with the diner or its characters reinforcing the neural pathways of terror. The boy's avoidance behaviors intensified. Routes to school adjusted to minimize proximity to the building. Errands planned around staying as far from the establishment as possible. In seeking comfort amid this persistent fear, the Crying Child formed an attachment to a Fredbear plush toy, a soft replica of the very character that frightened him in mechanical form. This plush accompanied him everywhere, clutched in small hands during moments of distress, positioned beside his pillow during sleep, carried in a backpack during outings. The toy's presence seemed to offer a degree of control over the fear, a manageable version of the threat that the boy could hold and command. In quiet moments, observers might notice the boy speaking to the plush in hushed tones, conversations that suggested the toy spoke back to him, offering reassurance and companionship that he struggled to find elsewhere. This attachment highlighted the boy's isolation within his family structure. He had an older brother whose relationship with him had curdled from typical sibling rivalry into something more troubling. Where healthy brothers might tease occasionally while maintaining underlying affection, this older brother had embraced a pattern of sustained psychological torment. The brother found amusement in his siblings' fears, exploiting them systematically for entertainment. The primary tool of this torment was a foxy mask, a replica of another animatronic character from the broader Freddy Fazbear's brand, featuring an angular fox face with sharp teeth and an empty eye socket. The older brother would don this mask at unpredictable moments, appearing suddenly from darkened rooms or around corners, the frightening visage the first thing his younger sibling saw. The crying child's reaction proved consistent and extreme. Immediate tears accompanied by attempts to flee, small body trembling as fight-or-flight responses triggered by what his nervous system perceived as genuine threat. The brother's laughter followed these encounters, a sound that mixed adolescent cruelty with genuine amusement, suggesting he didn't fully comprehend or chose not to acknowledge the psychological impact of his actions. These encounters weren't isolated incidents, but formed patterns that structured the home environment. The crying child learned to anticipate attacks, his hypervigilance transforming the house into a landscape of potential threats. He avoided certain hallways, stayed away from rooms where the brother might lurk, and developed strategies for minimizing exposure. Yet the house's layout offered limited protection, and the older brother possessed the patience to wait for opportunities. Mealtimes became anxious affairs, the younger child eating quickly while monitoring doorways. Bedtime required checking under furniture and inside closets, the fear of the foxy mask blending with more traditional childhood fears of monsters in the dark. The brothers' friends participated in these torments, forming a group that amplified the harassment through coordination and numbers. Each friend possessed their own mask, representing Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, the core animatronic characters that formed Freddy Fazbear's brand identity. Together, this masked quartet would corner the crying child during group gatherings or when their paths crossed outside the home. Surrounded by these false faces, the boy's distress intensified, his cries for help often going unheeded as the group's laughter drowned his voice. The psychology underlying this group behavior revealed concerning dynamics. The older brother served as ringleader, his authority among his peers granting him the power to direct their collective actions. The friends likely experienced some discomfort with their participation, but peer pressure and the desire to maintain standing within the group overcame whatever empathy they might have felt. For the crying child, these encounters taught lessons about powerlessness and the unreliability of external intervention. Adults might be present in adjacent rooms, yet help rarely came quickly enough to prevent the psychological assault. Within the family home, the crying child's bedroom became simultaneously sanctuary and prison. The space reflected his interests and fears in equal measure, with plush animatronic toys positioned on shelves and the bed. These soft replicas watched over him with stitched eyes and frozen smiles, their presence intended to comfort, but also serving as constant reminders of the source of his fears. The room's door provided minimal security, lacking a lock that might have granted genuine protection but from his brother's intrusions. Windows looked out toward the neighborhood, with Fredbear's family diner visible in the distance when conditions allowed, its sign a beacon of dread rather than joy. The boy spent significant time in this room, often alone, engaged in quiet play that avoided attracting attention. The Fredbear plush remained his primary companion, positioned in ways that suggested conversation and interaction beyond typical toy play. To observers, These one-sided dialogues might appear concerning, indications of social isolation manifesting in imaginative compensation. The boy seemed to derive genuine comfort from these interactions, the plush representing something stable and controllable in a home environment that felt increasingly chaotic and threatening. Nighttime brought additional challenges for the crying child, as the darkness transformed familiar spaces into threatening landscapes. His sleep suffered from recurring nightmares featuring the animatronics, visions where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie towered over him with mechanically clicking jaws, or where the foxy mask his brother wore became real, metallic teeth gnashing in the shadows. These nightmares carried a visceral quality that left him gasping awake, sheets damp with perspiration, heart racing as he struggled to distinguish dream from reality in the disorienting moments after waking. The content of these nightmares revealed the deep psychological impact of sustained fear exposure. The animatronics in his dreams didn't simply frighten him, they pursued him through impossible geometries, their movements jerky and unnatural, accompanied by mechanical sounds amplified to overwhelming volume. Sometimes the dreams placed him inside Fredbear's family diner after hours, alone in dark corridors while the animatronics searched for him, their footsteps echoing through empty halls. Other nights, the nightmares brought the animatronics to his bedroom, manifesting beside his bed or emerging from his closet, the boundaries between the diner and his home collapsing in his sleeping mind. These sleep disturbances contributed to a cycle of exhaustion and heightened anxiety during waking hours. The boy's functioning at school suffered, his ability to concentrate compromised by lack of quality rest. Teachers noted his tendency to startle easily, his reluctance to participate in group activities, and the way he seemed to fold into himself during unstructured time. The Fredbear plush accompanied him to school when policies allowed, a transitional object that helped him navigate social spaces that felt overwhelming. Outside the home, the crying child's encounters with Fredbear's family diner took various forms, each reinforcing his fear through different mechanisms. On one particularly memorable occasion, captured in the fragmented memories that would later define his story, the boy found himself locked outside the diner during rain. The circumstances remained unclear, whether he had been brought along on a family outing and somehow separated from his group, or if he had approached the building alone driven by some compulsion to confront his fear. Rain fell steadily that afternoon, drops pattering against the pavement and running in rivulets down the diner's windows. The boy pressed his face against the glass, peering into the establishment's interior, where lights glowed warmly and families gathered around tables. The doors remained locked from his side, whether due to timing between service periods or some other operational reason. This physical barrier created a strange dynamic where the source of his fear existed simultaneously, close and distant, visible but unreachable, its threat contained behind glass, yet still powerful enough to hold him in place. During this episode, a figure in a Spring Bonnie suit appeared in the boy's peripheral vision, standing near the building's side entrance. The Golden Rabbit's presence there seemed inexplicable, neither inside performing nor clearly outside for any obvious purpose. The suit's wearer remained motionless, the empty eyes of the costume creating the impression of observation, despite the lack of visible human agency. For the crying child, this encounter amplified the surreal quality of the moment. The rain, the locked doors, the silent animatronic figure combining to create a scene that would resurface in his nightmares. The Spring Bonnie suit's presence outside normal performance context suggested the liminal space between the diner's public and private operations. Perhaps an employee was in the process of entering or exiting, caught mid-transition between the safe room where the suits were stored and the performance areas. Or possibly, the figure represented something else entirely, connected to the darker undercurrents that ran through the establishment's history. The ambiguity of the moment left it open to interpretation, a fragment of experience that the crying child's mind struggled to integrate. Other encounters with diner employees occurred during the family's visits to the establishment, occasions when the crying child's parents or older brother compelled his attendance despite his protests. Staff members in purple uniforms moved through the background of these visits, their duties including maintenance of the animatronic systems and general facility upkeep. The boy might catch glimpses of these workers entering and exiting restricted areas, carrying tools or spare parts, their presence demystifying the animatronics operation while simultaneously making it more disturbing through the revelation of the machinery beneath the magic. One particular employee appeared with notable frequency in the boy's memories of these visits, a figure in purple whose responsibilities seemed to center on the springlock suits specifically. This worker might be observed in the safe room through briefly opened doors, hands working the cranks that compressed endoskeletons, or conducting maintenance checks on the suits between performances. The purple uniform became associated in the crying child's mind with the hidden aspects of the diner, the mechanical truth behind the cheerful facade, adding another layer to his complex relationship with the establishment. As the boy's birthday approached, plans formed for a celebration at Fredbear's family diner, despite his obvious distress at the prospect. This decision reflected family dynamics, where the older brother's preferences and social standing took precedence over the younger child's psychological well-being. To the parents, perhaps the party represented an opportunity for exposure therapy, a chance to help their frightened son overcome his phobia through controlled contact with its source. Or possibly it simply seemed practical, a venue that could accommodate the extended family and friends, while providing entertainment that would appeal to most of the children in attendance. For the crying child, the announcement of this plan triggered a period of mounting dread that colored the days leading to the event. His protests fell on deaf ears or met with dismissal, adults assuring him that he would enjoy himself once the party began, that the animatronics weren't truly frightening, that it would be a special day he would remember fondly. These reassurances failed to penetrate the boy's anxiety, which manifested in physical symptoms, including appetite loss, difficulty sleeping, and a general state of hypervigilance that exhausted him. The older brother and his friends viewed the upcoming party as an opportunity for their most elaborate prank yet, a culmination of the sustained campaign of fear they had waged against the crying child. In their adolescent reasoning, the setting of the diner, surrounded by the actual animatronics rather than mere masks, would amplify the impact of their actions to unforgettable levels. Plans formed in hushed conversations during school and after-hours gatherings, the group coordinating their roles in what they envisioned as the ultimate scare. The days preceding the party saw the harassment intensify as the brother and his friends built toward their planned crescendo. The crying child found himself cornered more frequently, the masked quartet surrounding him in the diner during a preliminary visit, their forms blocking escape routes as they pushed him closer to the stage where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie stood in performance mode. The boy's pleas went unacknowledged, his tears and struggles serving only to fuel the group's amusement, their laughter echoing through the establishment as other patrons either failed to notice or chose not to intervene. On the day of the birthday celebration, Fredbear's family diner prepared for the event with its standard party package protocols. Staff set up a designated area near the main stage, tables arranged in a configuration that would accommodate the expected guests while providing clear sightlines to the animatronic performances. Purple and yellow streamers draped from ceiling fixtures, their colors matching the diner's aesthetic and creating festive atmosphere. Balloons clustered at table corners and floated near the stage, their strings weighted to keep them from drifting. A birthday cake waited in the kitchen, ready to be brought out during the scheduled celebration period between performances. The guest list included family members and classmates of both brothers, creating a mixed gathering where the social dynamics of different age groups would intersect. Adults settled at peripheral tables, engaging in conversations while keeping partial attention on the children who gravitated toward the arcade games and performance area. The crying child arrived with visible reluctance, his small hand gripping the Fredbear plush with intensity that whitened his knuckles, his eyes scanning the space with the wariness of prey entering predator territory. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie had been prepared for performance, their systems checked during morning maintenance to ensure smooth operation during the party. The springlock mechanisms were engaged in animatronic mode. The endoskeletons expanded to their full interior positions to power the automated movements that would occur during shows. The characters stood on their stage positions, Fredbear center front, with Spring Bonnie slightly back and to the side, their poses frozen in mid-gesture until activation. Stage lights illuminated them from multiple angles, casting shadows that shifted as guests moved through the space. As the party progressed through its early phases, the crying child maintained distance from the stage, positioning himself at the furthest table where he could monitor the animatronics while maximizing the space between himself and them. His isolation stood in stark contrast to the other children's engagement with the environment, their excited chatter and laughter filling the diner as they anticipated the upcoming show. The boy's parents attempted periodic encouragement, urging him to join the other children, to participate in the games, to approach the stage for a better view, but he resisted these suggestions with quiet determination. The older brother and his friends circulated through the party space, their masks not yet donned, but ready for deployment at the crucial moment. They projected casual normalcy for the benefit of observing adults while exchanging meaningful glances that communicated their shared anticipation. As the scheduled performance time approached and guests began gathering near the stage, the group's movements became more purposeful, positioning themselves in relation to the crying child's location with the coordination of practiced predators. The animatronic show began on schedule, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie activating with the characteristic servo whir that preceded their movements. Fredbear's jaw opened as pre-recorded audio began playing through speakers integrated into his head, his voice welcoming the party guests and announcing the beginning of a special birthday celebration. Spring Bonnie's guitar-holding arms moved in programmed patterns, fingers appearing to strum strings in synchronization with the music track. The performances unfolded with mechanical precision, each gesture and rotation occurring at exact intervals determined by the programming, creating the illusion of life through carefully choreographed repetition. Children near the stage watched with varying degrees of engagement, some dancing to the music, while others simply observed the movements with the fascination that animatronics inspired in young minds. Adults continued their peripheral conversations, the show familiar enough to not demand full attention while still providing a pleasant background to the social gathering. The crying child remained rooted to his distant position, his focus locked on Fredbear's moving form, the golden bear's jaw opening and closing with each lyric creating a hypnotic and terrifying pattern that held the boy's attention despite his desire to look away. As the performance reached its midpoint, The older brother and his friends enacted their plan with sudden coordination. They donned their masks in smooth motions, transforming from recognizable teenagers into animatronic facsimiles, the Foxy, Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica masks obscuring their human features. The group moved as a unit toward the crying child's position, their approach registering in his awareness with gradually mounting alarm. He clutched the Fredbear plush tighter, his body tensing for flight. But the group's positioning had already eliminated easy escape routes. The masked figures surrounded the boy's chair, their hands reaching out to grasp his arms and body despite his immediate resistance. The crying child's protests began as whimpers that quickly escalated to audible cries, his small form twisting in their grip as they lifted him from the seat. The Fredbear plush fell from his hands during the struggle, landing on the checkered floor as the group carried him away from the safety of the peripheral tables. Other guests began noticing the commotion, heads turning toward the disturbance. But the speed of the group's actions and the noisy environment of the ongoing performance created lag in comprehension and response. The masked quartet carried the crying child toward the stage with purposeful strides, their grips firm despite his increasingly frantic struggles. The boy's cries cut through the ambient noise, drawing more attention from the gathered crowd. But the group's momentum carried them forward. They mounted the stage steps, positioning themselves directly in front of Fredbear's performing form, the Golden Bear's automated show continuing without acknowledgement of their intrusion. Spring Bonnie's movements proceeded in parallel, the rabbit's programming proceeding along its predetermined path. The older brother, wearing the Foxy mask, led the final positioning as the group lifted the crying child higher, raising him toward Fredbear's head level. The boy's struggles reached desperate intensity, his legs kicking and arms flailing in attempts to break free from the multiple hands that held him. His cries had become continuous now, a sound of pure terror that should have triggered immediate intervention, but instead seemed to freeze observers in a moment of confusion about whether this was planned entertainment or genuine crisis. The group positioned the crying child's head directly in front of Fredbear's open mouth, timing their movement to coincide with the animatronics' programmed jaw cycle. In their adolescent conception, this would create a mock kiss between the boy and the character he feared most, a prank that would be remembered and laughed about for years. They failed to account for the mechanical nature of Fredbear's movements, the precise timing and force that drove the jaw's motion, the fundamental difference between a person in a costume and an animatronic following programmed commands. Fredbear's performance continued its scripted sequence, the jaw that had been opening to form words now beginning its programmed closing motion. The timing aligned catastrophically with the moment when the crying child's head entered the space between the upper and lower jaw sections. The endoskeleton-driven mechanisms that powered the jaw possessed significant force, necessary to overcome the weight and resistance of the costume materials and to create visible motion that registered from audience distance. When these mechanisms engaged with the boy's head occupying the jaw space, they encountered resistance that the programming wasn't designed to recognize or accommodate. The bite itself occurred with mechanical inevitability, the upper and lower jaws coming together along their programmed path regardless of the obstruction. The sound that resulted carried distinct qualities that would haunt witnesses in the days and years that followed. A combination of the mechanical crunching of the animatronic jaw meeting resistance and the organic reality of skull and tissue compressed by forces they weren't designed to withstand. This sound cut through every other noise in the diner, piercing through the music still playing from Spring Bonnie's segment of the performance, through the ambient conversation and arcade game bleeps, creating a moment of terrible clarity. The crying child's screams ceased immediately as the bite completed, his body going limp in the grip of the masked figures who stood frozen in their positions, shock overriding their ability to respond. Blood began flowing from the injury site, where metal teeth had penetrated flesh and bone. The crimson stark against the golden fur of Fredbear's jaw mechanism and the pale skin of the child. The animatronics programming continued for a fraction of a second before manual intervention, the jaw beginning to open again for the next word of the song. This mechanical motion revealing the full extent of the damage. The older brother's hands released first, the foxy mask tumbling from his head as he stepped backward, his face visible now and reflecting a progression from triumph to confusion to dawning horror in the space of heartbeats. His friends maintained their grips a moment longer before similar realizations struck, and they too released, the crying child's body slumping forward as support disappeared. Staff members who had been positioned throughout the diner during the performance rushed toward the stage, their training for various emergencies activating, though nothing had prepared them specifically for this scenario. The diner's atmosphere underwent complete transformation in the seconds following the bite. The music continued for another few bars before someone reached the audio controls and killed the sound system. Spring, Bonnie's movements stuttering to a halt as power was cut to the stage systems. Adults who had been socializing rose from their seats, some moving toward the stage while others instinctively gathered their own children close, maternal and paternal instincts responding to the presence of danger, even as minds struggled to process what had occurred. Children in the crowd reacted with confusion predominantly, the younger ones beginning to cry in response to the sudden tension and adult panic rather than clear understanding of events. On the stage, the crying child lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his head and flowing with the slight incline of the platform toward the stage edge. The Fredbear plush that had fallen earlier remained on the diner floor meters away, its soft form unable to provide the protection the boy had imagined it offered. Staff members knelt beside the child, one applying pressure to the wound with cloth napkins grabbed from nearby tables, while another called for emergency services on the diner's phone. Their voices carried urgent professional calm, providing medical details to emergency dispatchers while also attempting to manage the crowd of witnesses. The older brother stood apart from the growing cluster around his sibling, the foxy mask still on the floor where it had fallen, his hands moving through patterns suggesting he didn't know what to do with them. His friends had retreated from the stage entirely, their masks also discarded, their faces pale as they clustered together at the diner's periphery. Parents began collecting their children and moving toward exits, the party's celebratory purpose completely supplanted by the need to remove young witnesses from the traumatic scene. The diner's staff attempted to maintain some order in the exodus, directing families toward clear pathways while keeping the area around the stage clear for the emergency response that would arrive shortly. Fredbear remained motionless in his performance position. The animatronics systems shut down, but his physical form still locked in the pose he'd held when the bite occurred. Blood stained his jaw mechanism, visceral evidence of what had transpired marking the cheerful golden exterior with dark crimson patterns. Spring Bonnie stood adjacent, similarly frozen mid-gesture, the rabbit's guitar-holding pose maintained through the chaos as the animatronic became an unwitting witness to the tragedy. These mechanical performers, designed to bring joy, had become instruments of devastating harm through no volition of their own, their programming and construction simply intersecting catastrophically with human vulnerability. Emergency services arrived within minutes, paramedics entering the diner with equipment cases and immediately taking over care of the crying child from the staff who had been providing initial aid. The professionals worked with practiced efficiency, assessing the injury's severity and preparing the boy for transport, while communicating continuously among themselves in medical shorthand that excluded surrounding listeners from full comprehension of their assessments. The child was placed on a stretcher, his small form appearing even smaller against the adult-sized equipment, his head carefully stabilized to prevent additional damage during movement. The ambulance departure marked a transition point in the diner's crisis response, the immediate medical emergency giving way to investigation and documentation phases. Police arrived to secure the scene, their presence transforming the family entertainment venue into something resembling a crime scene despite the accidental nature of the incident. Officers took statements from witnesses, their notebooks filling with accounts from parents, staff members, and the older brother's friends who provided fragmentary and often contradictory descriptions of the moments leading to the bite. The older brother himself sat in a booth under supervision, his earlier bravado completely dissolved into shock-induced silence. Fredbear's family diner closed for the remainder of the day. The remaining guests escorted out as staff began the grim task of cleaning the stage area. The blood required careful attention, its removal necessary both for practical reasons and as part of processing the trauma that had occurred in this space designed for joy. The animatronics remained powered down throughout this process, their presence on stage now carrying entirely different connotations than the benign entertainment they had represented hours earlier. At the hospital where the crying child had been transported, medical personnel worked to stabilize his condition in a trauma bay where equipment beeped and hummed with the rhythms of life support and monitoring. The injury he had sustained was severe, the crushing force of Fredbear's jaw having caused significant damage to his skull and the brain tissue beneath. Doctors consulted with specialists, reviewing imaging that revealed the extent of trauma while family members gathered in waiting areas, their faces reflecting the shock and guilt and fear that accompanied such sudden catastrophe. The boy was moved to an intensive care unit after initial stabilization, his small form nearly lost among the tubes and wires that connected him to machines performing functions his body could no longer maintain independently. A ventilator breathed for him with mechanical regularity, its rhythm joining the beeping of heart monitors and the soft chimes of IV pumps to create a soundscape of artificial life support. His head was wrapped in bandages that concealed the injury site while allowing medical staff access for necessary interventions and monitoring. Family members maintained vigil beside the bed, taking turns in the limited space the ICU protocols allowed. The older brother sat in one of the bedside chairs during his allowed periods, no longer wearing the Foxy mask, but unable to escape the role he had played in his sibling's condition. His whispered apologies formed a continuous backdrop during his visits, the words perhaps audible to the unconscious child, or perhaps spoken only for the brother's own need to express remorse that had come too late to prevent tragedy. Parents navigated the dual demands of maintaining hospital presence and managing the practical necessities that continued despite crisis, one always at the bedside while the other handled phone calls to extended family. Coordination with the hospital's social services, and the beginning of conversations with legal representatives about the incident at Fredbear's. The family structure that had existed before the birthday party had fractured irrevocably, each member now carrying individual burdens of responsibility, guilt, and grief that would shape their relationships permanently. In the crying child's ICU room, the plush toys from his bedroom had been brought and positioned on available surfaces where medical equipment allowed, the Fredbear plush among them occupying a place on the bedside table. These soft figures maintained their silent watch, their stitched features unchanging as the boy's condition fluctuated according to the readouts on surrounding monitors. The toy's presence reflected the family's hope that familiar comfort might reach through the fog of unconsciousness, that some part of the child might recognize these companions from healthier days. The boy's consciousness, to the extent it persisted in his damaged state, seemed to drift through spaces that blurred reality and nightmare. Medical staff noted occasional eye movements beneath closed lids that suggested REM sleep periods where dreams or visions occurred. The content of these experiences remained unknowable to observers, but the twitching and subtle grimaces that occasionally crossed the boy's face suggested they carried distressing emotional valence. Perhaps in these semi-conscious states, he relived the moments before the bite, or wandered through darker versions of Fredbear's family diner, where the animatronics pursued him through endless corridors. Doctors provided updates to the family, with clinical honesty that balanced hope against realistic outcome expectations. The injury had caused severe trauma, they explained, with swelling and damage that would require time to fully assess. The boy's youth worked in his favor regarding healing potential, but the severity of the initial damage created significant barriers to recovery. Treatment focused on maintaining stability, reducing intracranial pressure, and preventing secondary complications while the body's natural healing processes attempted to repair what had been broken. Days passed in the ICU with a timeless quality where the only markers of progression came from the scheduled changing of shifts, the arrival of new visitors during permitted hours, and the subtle adjustments to medication protocols as doctors responded to changing indicators in the monitoring data. The crying child remained in his suspended state, neither waking nor declining precipitously, his condition occupying a liminal space between presence and absence that challenged the family's ability to maintain hope while preparing for loss. The older brother's visits grew more difficult with each passing day as the initial shock evolved into processed guilt. He understood now in ways that adolescent imagination couldn't have grasped before the consequences of actions that had seemed like harmless escalation of sibling rivalry. The foxy mask that had been his tool of choice for tormenting his younger brother had been left behind at the diner, collected by investigators as evidence, though no criminal charges would ultimately be filed given the accidental nature of the tragedy. The brother no longer needed the physical mask to feel haunted by what he had done. In the quiet hours when only one parent remained at the bedside and the ICU's lights had been dimmed to promote rest cycles, a phenomenon occurred that would later become part of the mysterious narrative surrounding these events. The crying child seemed to hover closer to consciousness, his eyelids fluttering in patterns that suggested awareness lurking just beneath the surface. During one such episode, with the mother sitting beside the bed and the rhythmic beeping of monitors creating a meditative background, a voice seemed to emerge from the barely conscious child's vicinity, words so soft they might have been imagined. "I will put you back together." The phrase carried multiple possible meanings, a promise of physical restoration, or perhaps something more metaphysical, a reassurance about continuity of existence beyond the body's failure. The source of these words remained ambiguous, whether they represented the child's own subconscious thoughts, vocalized through some unexplained mechanism, or originated from some external presence offering comfort in his final moments, or existed only in the perception of grief-stricken observers desperate for meaning in tragedy. The mother would later report hearing this phrase, though she couldn't definitively identify its source, creating one of the many unexplained elements that would weave through the narrative of these events. On the 6th day of the crying child's hospitalization, The monitors that had maintained their steady rhythms began showing changes that prompted immediate response from medical staff. Heart rate variations triggered alarms that brought nurses and doctors converging on the room. Their professional assessment concluding quickly that the body was beginning to fail despite all interventions. The family was summoned from waiting areas, gathering around the bed as medical personnel stepped back to provide space for final moments. The transition from life to death proceeded with a quiet that belied its profound significance. The heart monitor's regular beeping grew irregular, gaps lengthening between pulses as the organ struggled to maintain function. The family held the boy's hands and touched his face, their tears falling silently as they offered final words of love and apology and farewell. The older brother pressed close despite his earlier reluctance, his face contorted with grief as he whispered desperately about all the things he wished he could change, the cruelty he would take back if time could reverse. The final heartbeat registered on the monitor, then silence, then the sustained tone that signaled complete cardiac arrest. Medical staff allowed several moments of this sound to continue before entering to shut down the monitoring equipment, their movements respectful as they provided the family space for their initial grief. The ventilator was disconnected following established protocols, its mechanical breathing ceasing as the boy's chest stilled into permanent rest. The crying child's face relaxed in death, the tension that had marked even his unconscious state releasing as whatever awareness had persisted departed. In the aftermath of the death, the family began the crushing process of transitioning from crisis response to grief management and funeral arrangements. The hospital's social services provided resources and guidance through procedures that felt simultaneously too complex and too simple for the magnitude of loss being processed. The boy's body was prepared for transport to a funeral home, the tubes and bandages removed, his small form cleaned and dressed in clothes selected by parents who had never imagined performing such a task. The older brother's guilt evolved into a defining characteristic of his psychology, the weight of responsibility for his sibling's death reshaping his personality and future trajectory in ways that would ripple through decades. His friends who had participated in the prank faced their own reckoning, their role as accomplices carrying less direct responsibility, but still sufficient to generate lasting psychological impact. Each of the masked quartet would carry forward their own version of guilt and trauma, the memory of that birthday party replacing whatever innocent memories of childhood they had been accumulating. At Fredbear's family diner, the bite's aftermath initiated investigations that examined every aspect of the establishment's operations and animatronic systems. The springlock suits came under particular scrutiny, their dual functionality design now revealed as containing inherent dangers that no amount of training or protocols could fully mitigate. The suits were removed from service immediately, locked away in storage areas while company leadership debated their future. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie's stage appearances ceased, the characters that had been the diner's primary draw now associated with tragedy in ways that made their continued use untenable. Patronage declined precipitously as news of the incident spread through the community and then broader media coverage. Parents who had previously considered Fredbear's a safe venue for family entertainment now viewed it with suspicion and fear. The diner's phone stopped ringing with party reservations, its dining room seating fewer families each day as the establishment's reputation transformed from innovative entertainment to site of tragedy. The staff's morale suffered as uncertainty about the business's future combined with their own trauma from having witnessed the bite and its immediate aftermath. Company leadership faced difficult decisions about the diner's future. Financial realities argued for closure, the combination of declined revenue and potential liability, making continued operation untenable. Yet closure would mean acknowledging defeat, allowing a single tragic incident to destroy what had been built. For a period, the diner limped along with reduced hours and scaled-back operations. The stage performances discontinued entirely, while the dining service continued for the diminishing customer base that still chose to visit. The ultimate closure came not through formal announcement, but through gradual abandonment. The diner's doors remaining locked more days than open, until eventually they never reopened. The building stood vacant, its interior still containing the apparatus of entertainment, now gathering dust in the darkness. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie remained on their stage, powered down permanently, their golden forms slowly deteriorating in the absence of maintenance. The building became a landmark of local tragedy, pointed out in hushed tones as the place where that terrible thing happened. Its specific details sometimes forgotten, but the emotional resonance remaining. In the years following the bite of 1983, the franchise attempted to distance itself from the tragedy while retaining the core concept that had proven profitable before the incident. New locations opened in different communities. The branding shifted to emphasize Freddy Fazbear as the primary character rather than Fredbear, and the animatronic designs evolved to eliminate the springlock mechanisms that had contributed to the tragedy. These new establishments opened with enhanced safety protocols and a focus on stage-only performances that eliminated the human wearable costume element. One such location opened in 1987, designed to represent the franchise's evolution and redemption. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. 1987 location occupied a building larger than the original Fredbear's Family Diner, its floor plan allowing for multiple dining areas, an expanded arcade section, and a main stage area that could accommodate more elaborate animatronic performances. The designers had learned from the past, creating physical separation between the performance space and the audience that would prevent the kind of direct contact that had enabled the 1983 tragedy. The animatronics in this new location embraced a different aesthetic philosophy than their predecessors. Where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie had featured artificial fur and attempted realistic proportions, the new generation adopted a toy-like appearance with smooth plastic exteriors and exaggerated features. Toy Freddy stood as the primary attraction, his design featuring a rounder, more approachable form than the original Freddy character. His brown exterior gleamed with a plastic sheen, while rosy red cheeks added to his child-friendly appearance. Toy Bonnie, reimagined as a bright blue rabbit with green eyes, played guitar in energetic programmed performances. Toy Chica, the yellow chicken character with pink accents, completed the main trio with cupcake-holding poses and cheerful demeanor. These toy animatronics incorporated technological advances that had occurred in the years since Fredbear's closure. Their movements possessed greater fluidity through improved servo motors and more sophisticated programming that allowed for more natural-seeming gestures and reactions. The endoskeletons that powered them were designed specifically for performance rather than dual functionality, eliminating the dangerous springlock mechanisms entirely. Safety had become paramount in the design philosophy, with redundant systems and fail-safes built into every aspect of the animatronics construction. One of the most significant innovations in the toy animatronics involved facial recognition technology, a cutting-edge feature for the era that connected to criminal databases. The system used cameras positioned in the animatronic's eyes to scan faces in the crowd, theoretically allowing the characters to identify individuals with criminal records and alert staff to their presence. The technology represented the company's commitment to safety, an attempt to prevent any future incidents through proactive identification of potential threats. However, the system's implementation would prove problematic, its limitations and quirks creating unintended consequences. Additional characters expanded the roster beyond the main trio. Mangle, originally designated as Toy Foxy, occupied a space designated as the Kids' Cove, where the character's design intentionally supported disassembly and reassembly by children. This interactive element proved popular, but resulted in the character existing in a perpetual state of partial deconstruction, wires exposed and limbs tangled in ways that gave it a distinctly unsettling appearance despite the toy aesthetic. Balloon Boy, a smaller animatronic that held balloons and greeting signs, wandered designated areas during peak hours. His simple programming focused on distribution of balloons to young visitors. The puppet, also known as the marionette, resided in a prize corner area, its tall, slender form contained within a large music box when not active. This character's role centered on prize distribution, emerging to deliver rewards to children who had accumulated sufficient tickets from arcade games. The puppet's design deliberately contrasted with the other toy animatronics, its black and white coloring and mask-like face creating a theatrical appearance that stood apart from the bright plastics of its counterparts. The 1987 location's operational protocols reflected lessons learned from the 1983 tragedy, though not all these lessons proved sufficient. The animatronics were permitted to roam freely during daytime hours, a feature intended to increase interactivity and create more memorable experiences for visiting families. The toy characters would move through the dining areas and arcade spaces, pausing to interact with children, pose for photographs, and maintain dynamic presence throughout the establishment. This freedom represented confidence in the new design's safety, the absence of springlock mechanisms, and the inclusion of proximity sensors meant to prevent collisions, creating a sense that these animatronics could safely share space with guests. However, the systems that governed this free-roaming behavior proved imperfect. Staff members began noting irregularities in the animatronics' movements, particularly during evening hours as daylight waned. The characters would sometimes fixate on adult visitors, their facial recognition systems appearing to malfunction in ways that caused prolonged staring and following behaviors. Reports accumulated in maintenance logs describing Toy Bonnie tracking a specific parent across the dining area, or Toy Freddy's head rotating to maintain visual contact with an adult male near the arcade. These behaviors persisting beyond normal interaction parameters. Phone Guy, a company employee whose voice became familiar through recorded messages left for night shift security personnel, documented these concerns in his characteristic combination of casual tone and underlying unease. His recordings, played through the office phone system for new night guards, referenced the animatronics' quirky behaviors without fully explaining their implications. He mentioned previous incidents that had shaped current protocols, speaking around the 1983 bite without explicitly naming it, creating a sense of institutional knowledge that was simultaneously present and obscured. The night shift position at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza 1987 location carried responsibilities that went beyond typical security work, as Phone Guy's recordings made clear. The animatronics' free-roaming capabilities extended into after-hours periods, their programming apparently interpreting the empty building as continued performance space. Night guards monitored camera feeds from a central office, tracking the toy animatronics' movements through the facility while managing power consumption and using doors and lights to prevent unwanted encounters. The job's parameters suggested danger without explicitly defining it, creating an atmosphere of tension that infused the overnight hours. As the location operated through its initial months, patterns emerged that connected to the franchise's tragic history in ways that would prove grimly prophetic. The combination of advanced animatronic systems, free-roaming capabilities, and imperfect safeguards created conditions where tragedy could occur despite all the precautions that had been implemented. The facial recognition technology that was meant to enhance safety instead introduced new variables, its tampering leading to behaviors that staff struggled to predict or control. The shift to the 1987 incident began with a birthday party, history repeating itself in ways that would have seemed too tragic to be coincidental if the circumstances weren't documented in company records. A celebration had been scheduled during peak daytime hours, the establishment filled with families as the toy animatronics performed their designated functions throughout the space. The atmosphere carried the familiar energy of such events, children's laughter mixing with arcade game sounds and the mechanical movements of the performers creating the sensory environment that defined these establishments. A security guard who had worked night shifts was assigned to day shift coverage for this particular event. Their responsibilities including oversight of the animatronics' interactions with guests and general crowd management. This reassignment placed someone familiar with the character's nocturnal irregularities into position during the vulnerable daytime period when families filled the space. The guard moved through the establishment with heightened awareness born from night shift experiences, monitoring the toy animatronics' behaviors for signs of the glitches and fixations that characterized their after-hours activity. The bite itself occurred with shocking suddenness during the party's peak activity period. One of the toy animatronics, the specific character remaining ambiguous in official records though various accounts suggested possibilities, bit a person with sufficient force to cause catastrophic injury. The victim's frontal lobe was removed with disturbing precision, the animatronic's jaw mechanisms delivering force that human tissue and bone couldn't withstand. The injury's specific nature, the removal of this particular brain region, would become a defining detail in the incident's retelling, highlighting both the severity of harm and the strange specificity of the damage. Witnesses described chaos in the immediate aftermath, the party atmosphere shattering as the bite registered in awareness. Screams cut through the ambient noise as blood became visible and the victim's condition apparent. Staff members converged on the scene with emergency protocols activating, though as with the 1983 incident, no protocol could truly prepare anyone for confronting such violence in a space designed for family entertainment. The toy animatronic responsible for the bite was deactivated immediately. Its systems shut down as it was secured away from the crowd. Emergency services responded rapidly, paramedics arriving to provide immediate care before transporting the victim to a hospital facility equipped to handle severe trauma. The victim's survival, despite the frontal lobe's removal, would later become a point of medical fascination documented in Phone Guy's subsequent recordings, where he marveled at the human body's capacity to continue functioning even after losing this significant brain region. The survival carried implications both hopeful and haunting, life preserved but forever altered by the removal of the brain area responsible for decision-making, personality, and higher cognitive functions. The 1987 location's response to the bite followed patterns established by the 1983 incident, modified by the intervening years of corporate evolution. The decision was made to immediately restrict the toy animatronics' free-roaming privileges, confining them to stage performances only during daylight hours. The facial recognition systems came under intense scrutiny, their tampering and malfunction identified as potential contributing factors to the aggressive behavior that had led to the bite. The technology that was meant to enhance safety had instead introduced new vulnerabilities, its imperfect implementation creating risks that hadn't existed in simpler animatronic designs. Public reaction to the 1987 Bite echoed the response to its predecessor, news coverage spreading awareness of the incident beyond the immediate community. Parents questioned the safety of animatronic entertainment venues generally, their concerns extending beyond this specific location to encompass the entire concept. The franchise's attempt to distance itself from the 1983 tragedy through rebranding and redesign proved insufficient. The occurrence of a second major incident suggesting systemic problems rather than isolated misfortune. The location's closure followed within a relatively short period. Company leadership deciding that continued operation had become untenable. Announcements cited health concerns and referenced odors and other issues that provided public-facing explanations without explicitly connecting the closure to the Bite incident. The toy animatronics were scheduled for scrapping, their advanced designs and significant investment value nonetheless insufficient to overcome the association with tragedy. The characters that had been designed to represent the franchise's future instead became symbols of its continued inability to fully escape the violence inherent in its concept. The aftermath of the 1987 Bite included policy changes that would shape all subsequent Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. Free-roaming animatronics during business hours were eliminated entirely. The risks demonstrated by 2 major incidents in 4 years, proving too significant to justify the enhanced interactivity. Stage performances became strictly confined to designated times, with clear physical separation between characters and audience. The human wearable costume element remained discontinued, the springlock suits never returning, despite their absence having no bearing on the 1987 incident. The 2 bites, occurring in 1983 and 1987, formed a paired tragedy in the franchise's history, their combined weight creating a legacy that would haunt every subsequent iteration of the Freddy Fazbear's concept. The specific details differed significantly. The crying child's death versus the 1987 victim's survival with frontal lobe loss. The springlock mechanism versus the toy animatronics malfunction. The private party versus the crowded public event. But the fundamental pattern remained consistent. In spaces designed for joy, where technology was meant to enhance family entertainment, mechanical systems had intersected with human vulnerability to produce devastating harm. The psychological and emotional consequences rippled through multiple lives in both incidents. The crying child's older brother carried guilt that would define his existence, while the friends who had participated faced their own reckonings with consequence. The 1987 victim survived to face life fundamentally altered by the injury, adapting to existence without the brain region that had shaped personality and cognition. Families were fractured, employees traumatized, and communities left to process how spaces of innocence had become sites of tragedy. The animatronics themselves stood as mechanical actors in these dramas, their agency limited to programmed responses and physical capabilities that humans had designed and deployed. Fredbear's jaws had closed according to scripted timing. The toy animatronic in 1987 had acted according to compromised programming, neither character possessing volition or malice, yet both becoming instruments of harm. This absence of intent didn't diminish the reality of damage caused, instead highlighting the particular horror of violence delivered by systems meant to simulate life and companionship. The franchise's continued existence after both bites demonstrated corporate resilience that some might characterize as callousness, the pursuit of profit overriding the human cost documented in hospital records and death certificates. Yet the business also employed people, provided entertainment that most visitors experienced without harm, and represented genuine innovation in its integration of technology and hospitality. The moral calculus of whether operations should continue after tragedy proved complex, lacking clear answers that would satisfy all stakeholders and observers. For those who studied the franchise's lore in years that followed, seeking to understand the complete narrative of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and its various incarnations, the 2 bites stood as foundational events that explained much about subsequent developments. The restrictions on animatronic movement, the heightened security protocols, the sense of danger that permeated even locations where no incidents occurred, all traced back to 1983 and 1987. These were the moments when the promise of animatronic entertainment confronted the reality of mechanical systems' capacity for harm, when innovation's excitement gave way to caution's wisdom purchased through suffering. The legacy extended beyond policy and procedure into the realm of cultural memory and narrative. The bites became stories told and retold, details shifting slightly with each recounting, facts blending with speculation and theory. The crying child's identity remained officially obscured, his name absent from public records. Yet his experience became foundational to understanding the fear and tragedy that ran through the franchise's history. The 1987 victim similarly existed in records primarily through the injury sustained rather than personal identity, the frontal lobe's removal becoming shorthand for the incident itself. In the years following 1987, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would continue opening new locations despite the shadow cast by these events, each iteration attempting to balance the concept's entertainment appeal against safety concerns that could never be fully eliminated. The animatronic characters evolved through generations of design, their appearances and capabilities shifting in response to technological advancement and lessons learned from past failures. Yet the fundamental tension remained: the desire to create lifelike mechanical performers intersecting with the inherent risks of powerful machines operating in proximity to vulnerable humans. The narratives of the 2 bites intertwined in the broader lore, their separation by 4 years creating a gap that invited speculation about causation and connection. Did the 1983 incident directly lead to conditions that enabled 1987, or were they independent tragedies linked only by coincidental circumstance and the common context of animatronic entertainment? The answer likely contained elements of both: the franchise's response to the first bite shaping decisions that influenced the second, while random chance and human error played their own roles in each specific occurrence. For the individuals most directly affected, the crying child who died at age uncertain but young, the 1987 victim who survived with permanent alteration, the family members and friends who witnessed and participated in the events leading to harm. The bites represented personal catastrophes that transcended their roles in a franchise narrative. These were lives changed or ended, psychological landscapes reshaped by trauma, futures redirected along paths that diverged sharply from the trajectories that had seemed likely before animatronic jaws closed on flesh and bone. The promise, "I will put you back together," whether imagined or real, whether spiritual comfort or foreshadowing of darker events yet to come in the franchise's timeline, captured something essential about the desire for restoration in the face of irreversible harm. The crying child couldn't be made whole again, his death final despite any supernatural elements that might weave through the broader lore. The 1987 victim continued living, but in a fundamentally altered state. The frontal lobe's functions lost permanently. Yet the desire persisted, the hope that what had been broken might somehow be repaired, that tragedy might be reversed, or at least redeemed through meaning. As we emerge from this exploration of the bite of 83 and the bite of 87, drawing our attention back from the shadows of Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, 1987, we carry with us the weight of these interconnected tragedies. The Golden Bear and Rabbit, who began as simple entertainers. The toy animatronics designed to represent progress and safety, all became instruments in a narrative that reminded us of technology's double edge, its capacity to delight and to harm existing in uncomfortable proximity. These incidents live on in the memories of those affected, in the policies that govern entertainment venues, and in the stories told by those who seek to understand how joy and tragedy can coexist in spaces designed explicitly to separate them. The bites remain, permanent marks on the franchise's history and on the lives they touched. Their lessons purchased at costs too high, yet teaching truths too important to ignore about the fragile boundaries between wonder and danger in our technological age.